Funding for this program is provided by Annenberg CPD to advance excellent teaching.
Every class that passes and graduates without the skills that they need is an extraordinary waste of the most important asset of this country, our young people.
Louis V. Gerstner Jr. is a businessman, but he's talking about schools.
Teacher training, accountability. I mean, these were all very divisive issues before. We're seeing the people who really count in the school system, the people who are there every single day, from the governors down to the teachers, they're all starting to agree.
Louis V. Gerstner Jr., the chairman and CEO of IBM, is a committed education reformer who's concerned about our students' readiness for the workplace and for life in a democracy. He's leading the charge for higher standards in our schools. I'm John Merrow. Today, Lou Gerstner's in the spotlight. Today's school reform movement dates back to 1983, when this report, A Nation at Risk, warned that our schools were drowning in a rising tide of mediocrity. The call to raise academic standards continued under President George Bush. In 1989, Bush convened the nation's governors, including then Governor of Arkansas Bill Clinton, for the country's first ever National Education Summit in Charlottesville, Virginia.
Governors have accepted my invitation to come together for open and candid discussions about the future of American education. And I am grateful to each and every one of you, and I appreciate the depth of commitment shown by everyone assembled here today.
We consistently rank near the bottom in every international test of math and science ability and in other subjects critical to our future.
I firmly believe that the key will be found at the state and local levels.
Like A Nation at Risk before it, the 1989 summit came up with recommendations for schools, not orders. Out of the summit came 5 national education goals for the year 2000, ranging from having drug and violence-free schools to making American students #1 in the world in math and science. Very soon, the emphasis shifted from goals to standards. Albert Schenker, the teacher union leader, told this story back in 1993.
I was having dinner the other night in New York, and some people next to me wanted to know if I'd eaten there before, and were asking advice on the menu, and turned out that they were recently, the wife came from Moscow just a few weeks ago, and the man came from Azerbaijan, and they started talking about, oh, they love it here, but the one thing is education. They said, even though we have our kids in a very good private school, they said, our 8th grade youngster is learning what she was learning in the 3rd grade back home.
The president and the governors ran that 1989 summit, but in the 1990s, business leaders, including Lou Gerstner, began to play a larger role. In the speech you made in 1995 to the governors, you basically, it seems, to dismiss A Nation at Risk.
No massive change. That's the case. We have not seen the kind of institutional, the kind of national urgency and crisis that I think A Nation at Risk called for, the response that it called for. Remember what it said. It said that if a foreign company had imposed the public schools of America on this country, we would have declared it an act of war. Now, I don't think our country reacted that way to A Nation at Risk.
In that same speech, you said we basically need a fundamental, bone-jarring, full-fledged, 100% revolution. It discards the old and replaces it with a totally new, performance-driven system.
Right.
Lou Gerstner, radical.
Right. That's what we need. A performance-based system. That is the key to the whole thing. What has been missing, you know the history of education for the last 20 years better than I do. We have an idea every 6 months. You know, we go from charter schools to longer school days, to longer school years, to vouchers, to everybody's got an idea. Everybody's looking for the silver bullet. to fix public education in this country. There is no silver bullet. But what we need is a framework, a fundamental framework that says, okay, let's go try some of those ideas. There are probably some good ones in that list. But how are we going to know whether they succeed? How are we going to know whether they really produce results?
Lou Gerstner is not a newcomer to school reform. His interest in education goes back to his parents, neither of whom went to college. They made it clear that education would be his route to success.
I grew up in a family where neither of my parents went to college, where they both worked back in the days when two worker families was not as prevalent as it is today. And it was always part of my parents' dream and my ambitions that if I did well in school, that there would be a better future for me than they viewed their opportunities growing up.
After Dartmouth College and the Harvard Business School, Gerstner began climbing the ladder of success, American Express, RJR Nabisco, and in 1993, IBM. Lou Gerstner, other business leaders, and many educators as well, had concluded that having a set of general goals was not enough. The system needed clear standards so that progress or lack of progress could be measured. Gerstner led the way in calling a second National Education Summit.
We have all taken the time to come here to do something about one national priority that rises above all the others: fixing America's public education system. It's broken, and we all know that.
The business leaders and the nation's governors met at IBM in Palisades, New York in the spring of 1996. Symbolic of the changing role of the federal government, the President of the United States was not in charge of this summit. He was an invited guest.
In 1983, we said we've got a problem in our schools. We need to take tougher courses. We need to have other reforms. 1989, we said we need to know where we're going. We need goals. Here in 1996, you're saying you can have all the goals in the world, but unless somebody really has meaningful standards and a system of measuring whether you meet those standards, you won't achieve your goals.
The two-day summit was devoted entirely to talking about how to develop national academic standards.
We are talking about solid, purely academic standards in core subject areas. If you can't read and write, if you can't calculate, if you don't know the difference between Wisconsin and Nevada, one gambles and the other one doesn't, you should not be able to get a diploma, period.
The governors and business leaders wanted clear national standards, spelling out what every student needs to know in basic academic subjects before passing to the next grade. Students would be tested on a regular basis to measure their progress.
I was at the summit and remember the conversations about, well, we have to have standards, but nobody's willing to say, well, we have to have a set of standards. It's like every state is going to set its own standards.
That's correct.
Could you do that? Could IBM could you run a multinational company with every plant setting its own standards?
It's possible. It's possible. It wouldn't be the most efficient way. But if you think about running IBM or any other large multinational, multi-divisional company, you always make a choice as to when you should allow things to bubble up from the bottom and when you should dictate from the center. And it's an issue I think all leaders have. Decentralization versus centralization, and we face it all the time.
But not in standards. I mean, the cable's got to fit, whether you're in Poughkeepsie or in San Francisco.
Yes, but in some instances, you are willing to allow a difference of opinion to exist for a while people buy in and feel like they participated in establishing those standards. And that's what this is all about. Every attempt to impose standards from the top in the United States has failed. The American people will not accept a federally mandated set of standards. The fundamental issue of the last half of the 20th century has been change. And how do institutions adopt the change? What is the process of self-renewal that we keep up to date with this incredible change. The schools have not.
Deborah Meyer, a well-known progressive educator, disagrees with Gerstner's analysis.
We have more glorious things going on in American schooling today than we had 40 years ago, 80 years ago, 100 years ago.
These are good days?
Relatively speaking, they're on board. That American schooling didn't seem like a failure in the 1920s because very few people were in them. We didn't even think that that was the purpose of schools, to educate, well, most citizens.
You said in your book, Reinventing Education, ask any business leader who competes in the world economy, what's it like to be up against well-educated workforces? What is it like?
What it's like is that workers in other countries come to the workforce with far more skills than American workers. It has been estimated that American business spends in excess of $20 billion a year just training workers that come out of the school on basic skills.
But you
reading, writing, computing, communicating, not technical skills. We're not talking about standards that just are multiple choice tests. Standards can be written and have been written in certain jurisdictions that require students to explain things, to answer questions like why and how, as opposed to just what. And those skills of writing and thinking can be built into standards, and those are the skills that say basically, can this person think through a problem and communicate?
Meyer worries that business leaders are unrealistic in wanting immediate changes.
Don't think there are fast solutions for thoughtfulness. And if what we want is more responsible and thoughtful people, there isn't a faster solution than trying to create thoughtful and responsible institutions. Now, if that's not what we're asking for, and I think that is what we need, I think that's what employers are lacking. They're lacking employees who are thoughtful and responsible. And if I'm right about that, there isn't a faster way.
It takes time.
It takes time, and it takes creating thoughtful and responsible institutions.
Debbie Meyer, who is herself a thoughtful education reformer, said standards, getting tough, is not going to do it. If you, American business, wants thoughtful people to work for you, you have to have thoughtful schools.
Right.
Oh, you agree with Debbie?
Oh, I do agree. I mean, standards encompass the idea of being able to think and communicate and put ideas together, not simply feedback, remote, or just giving back facts.
So you're not saying just get tough?
No, I don't think this is a question of getting tough. I think this is a question of getting honest and fair with children in this country. The children, the parents in this country say they want high standards. They've expressed that in poll after poll. They want to do well, but we don't give them the opportunity to do well.
Anxious to keep school reform moving, Lou Gerstner, other business leaders, and the nation's governors convened a third National Education Summit in the fall of 1999.
4 more states are going to adopt standards within the next several months. That's 49. 49 out of 50 states. And so we come here today and yesterday, and we say, what's the next step? The next step is the accountability, the assessment, and the alignment, the 3 A's.
It's easy to talk about a child should learn certain things in 5th grade math, but how do you motivate teachers, students, and parents to meet those standards? And then what kind of accountability and what kind of encouragements in the form of incentives and so on do you need to make it happen? So the third summit was really about implementation. Gee, we've now got these standards. How do we make them effective in the schools?
And it's not going to be easy because the consequences for those students that don't measure up are severe, but the consequences to the state that doesn't hang in there is even more severe.
A few people at the summit worried that tough standards alone would cause problems, not solve them.
This is all about failure of adults, not about failure for children. Children are the ones who are going to be penalized and have been and are being penalized, but not by their own failure, but by the failure of adults. You can't set standards for children and not give children an opportunity to make up time lost, whether it's in the first 4 grades or the next 4, and so on. Mentoring, tutoring, extra time for teachers taking off, that's dollars.
There was a moment in the summit when a woman stood up and said children were going to be punished, not adults. You remember that?
Yes, I remember that. And I totally disagree with it. Because today, children are being punished every single day. We don't give them the education they need. Every day, our school system punishes children by pushing them out, social graduation, letting them get a diploma, and they don't have the skills they need to be effective.
If everybody would please take their seats, we'd appreciate it.
The summit concluded with an action statement calling for strict accountability.
The question by Louis Gerstner was seconded by Frank Keating. Any further discussion has been cut off. All those in favor of the action statement signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed signify by saying nay. Ayes have it. The action statement is adopted. I thank you.
I find the whole thing puzzling.
Ted Sizer, the education reformer, is more than puzzled. He's worried.
They've dealt with the policy arena in ways that have been devoted. They put a lot of time into it, but which have been simplistic. And that's why should we be surprised if I presume to move in and say, I know about running IBM, and my friends here know about running it because we're all teachers, and you've got to be respectful. I get most of it wrong because I don't know enough. So there's an arrogance to this, which has been costly.
Sizer is concerned that schooling is being reduced to test scores.
If you could sit down with Lou Gerstner, what would you say to him?
I'd warn him about the danger to put it in pretentious terms, academic freedom. The notion that there's one best curriculum framework, and then a small group of people. Lou, would you want a small group of people deciding the ideas that are going into your children's head? People you can't get at? People who say there's one answer? Is that what you want for your children?
It's a very broad-based group of people that are setting these standards.
So your answer to Ted Sizer is it's not a small group.
It's not a small group. It's a very inclusive group in most cases.
What do I do to my 3? And
There's a really, really inappropriate argument that says if you teach to a test, there's something wrong with that. I mean, there's nothing wrong with teaching to a test if it's a good test. I mean, all a test is a way to say, has this student achieved what I think they should achieve to move on to the next grade? That test takes place every single year for every single child in K through 12.
So you're just saying they should be good tests.
They should be good tests.
As Children states, he, the other adults are announced.
My biggest concern is that we say, as we go through this transition, that because some kids are going to get caught in the middle, we should reduce the standards effort for everybody. No. My answer is, let's go work with those kids. Let's really invest and try to help those kids that are caught in the transition. But 3 or 4 years from now, this country will be so happy, so pleased, so successful in knowing that we've raised the bar and the accomplishments of all the students. And we've got to get to that fairly quickly. I mean, at the end of the day, education isn't about summits. It isn't about what governors say. It isn't what CEOs say. It's what happens in that classroom between that teacher and those students.
Whether you agree or disagree with Lou Gerstner, the chairman and CEO of IBM, about the direction of education reform, there's no doubting his sincerity or his commitment. He's likely to be in the spotlight for years to come. I'm John Merrow. I hope you'll join me next time.
Funding for this program is provided by Annenberg CPB to advance excellent teaching. For information about this and other Annenberg CPB programs, call 1-800-LEARNER and visit us at www.learner.org.